You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
Happy New Year to you all. Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am still here in 2025, your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you from Lockhart, Texas. Happy New Year, you guys. I have to get this in. I have not spoken to you since last year. There it is. The dad jokes will not stop in 2025. That's the good news. And you know what? I can tease a bit of a surprise. I suppose it's a surprise because I've not spoken about it. I will be jumping aboard a podcast network this year. I think that's all I'll say about it right now. They have a Twitter handle, an X handle, if you will, but maybe I shouldn't speak any more about it yet because the paperwork is not finalized. However, it will help me grow this show. So I hope you guys are excited about that. You probably don't care. That's fine. It's exciting for me. I will keep delivering the same content, the same quality. Actually, it might get better. Could we imagine that? I might give you higher quality content this year. Let's strive for that. And enough of my rambling. Today, for the first episode of the new year, I've got new friend of the show, Joe Gillespie on. His Substack is fantastic. It's over at Write and Lift. Write as in W-R-I-T-E and Lift as in lifting weights. You're about to see that he's even on a treadmill this entire interview because, he walks the walk, no pun intended. Another dad joke right off the bat. So we're talking about main character syndrome, narcissism, spiritual, not religious, all of these things that are surrounding us in our everyday lives. We see them constantly. We are taking a deep dive into these topics. And without further ado, for the first time on the show and for the first show of 2025, I've got a man that's so fit, he can't even sit down for the interview. He's on a treadmill right now, walking from the Write and Lift Substack. Joe Gillespie, welcome for the first time to the show, sir.
It's a pleasure. Excited to kick off 2025 with you.
Yeah, I was telling you prior to this recording, I read your stuff all the time on Substack. I don't know how I subscribe to it, but in a stroke of brilliance at one point I did. And so I'm glad to get you on. I'll let you give my listeners an intro for yourself, anything you find pertinent, and we'll jump in.
Sure, absolutely. I'll keep it succinct. So obviously I write. I've always been a writer. I was going to school many years ago to teach English, and then kind of had a wake-up call moment where I realized I didn't really want to do that with my life. So started posting online, started posting on Instagram and on X, formerly Twitter, and just felt compelled to use these platforms as basically a self-publishing mechanism. So over time, grew my Substack, post there at least 2 times a week. I work in marketing professionally. So work from home, helping in what I do professionally kind of ties in with what I do creatively, so it's helping people who are, self-published writers or anyone who has some sort of skill or interest, take that and bring it online, which I think is, it's a real paradigm shift that we're living through. And, I think it's very important. So I'm happy to do that work. Other than that, married, have a young daughter. She's 15 months. Recently, become an inquirer in Orthodox Christianity, which I see your icons behind you. Mm-hmm. After, kind of a rational atheist type for many years. So my faith does play a big role. My new faith and that reemergence of faith plays a big role in my writing. And then broadly, I talk a lot about essentially creating the new world, right? So there's a lot of conversation online about returning to the past or just completely remaking everything and seeing the coming 21st century issues as problems of technology and culture and these types of things. And I do essentially try and take a middle road through that. So pulling from traditions and wisdom of the past and thinking about it in a current modern context. What are the anti-fragile things that are really going to help us nationally, individually, spiritually, mentally into the future? And my name, Right and Lift, kind of comes from this idea of it all starts with you. It starts with the physical body. If you take care of yourself and you learn to take care of yourself, that has a downstream effect on everything else you do. So, that to me, it's kind of the foundation, that, and of course, my family and faith. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's a lot. And I appreciate, I didn't specifically know you were starting to get interested in Orthodoxy. That's wonderful. I don't want people to think this is a bitch session, but there are some tendencies that we see in society and our modern culture that we're going to kind of discuss. And he's got two pieces that I'm tying together because it very much, the same spirit, let's say, runs through both ideas of main character syndrome and the culture of spiritual but not religious. And you end the main character piece with a line I wanted to start with, because I'm like, what a way to end it. And yes, doesn't it seem like there are more delusionally self-centered people today than a decade or so? And obviously, I think everyone listening to this and watching this is going to say yes. We're living, you say, in an epoch of narcissism. I could not agree more, because it's interesting. You often hear women, if you're single and you're dating or whatever, oh, my ex is a narcissist. And then sometimes the more I look at things online, I'm like, I'm not sure it was just your ex. So it's almost like some projection going on a lot of times. Not to say that women don't, have bad experience with narcissists. I get that. But a scroll through my Facebook feed in the mornings or whenever, it's the self-worship is ubiquitous, it seems like. So talk about main character syndrome and how it manifests itself in certain ways.
Sure. Well, part of it is that our technology has really incentivized this type of behavior. And I'll kind of get into how different personality types manifest in narcissistic behavior too. But, it really starts with, like, you hear the term like marketplace of ideas a lot. Like, oh, we're in a marketplace of ideas. The good ideas win out over time. Well, that might be true in mechanical engineering, because, certainly if you are driving an 18-wheeler across a bridge and it falls down, someone's on the shit list. But a lot of our ideas the good ideas don't necessarily win out. And I think that's kind of a fundamental misalignment with human nature in a lot of ways, which, yeah, good ideas, something can be an objectively good idea, but if it doesn't come, we're social creatures, right? We act, we act to confirm an image or a belief system that gives us some sort of social status, or it gives us, some sort of respect from people that we might look up to. And so a lot of this is, you have social media, and that's just it's kind of the perfect vehicle for explaining this, because like you said, you and I see it every single day. And you have your typical grandiose narcissist, right? Which is, it's the guy at the party who doesn't let anyone get a word in edgewise, who is talking about how good he looks. And that's pretty easy for everyone to see, right? But you also have your covert narcissists, or as I like to say, like your cry bullies. So, social media has really incentivized both types of behavior, because the mediating factor of being around other people and seeing their facial expressions and saying, being pulled aside and saying, hey man, you need to chill out a little bit. Like, I don't know if you realize it, but you're being really weird here. Like, that girl, she's not into you, or you're kind of making a fool of yourself. That doesn't exist on social media, right? Like, I can sit here and I can post whatever I want in the comfort of my own home. And it gets projected out in a way that it picks up steam from people who have those same resentments, or people who, aspire to that same lifestyle, and it gets reinforced. So you get encouraged to do it. So you see it both with, in that piece that you mentioned, I was speaking more so of the grandiose narcissists. But I've written a lot about the way that covert narcissism is expressed and incentivized too. And, in the main character syndrome piece, it comes kind of down to this idea that likes point to something that is true and good. Like there's a lot of streamers, I talked about this. There's a lot of streamers who make 6 figures a month just acting like fools, and being the main character. There's no real like foundation, moral foundation for what they're doing, right? Like if there was, they wouldn't be doing it. And so, with both the covert narcissists and the grandiose narcissists, it really comes down, in my opinion, it comes down to having a set belief system, whether that's, there's a lot of different aspects to that, right? But basic things that we've forgotten, like self-respect. This was a really normal conversation that, we could have 50 or 60 years ago. If you ask most people, what does it mean to be a self-respecting person? They would probably have a very similar idea or understanding based on how they were raised, the cultural uniformity in some sense. And nowadays, I think that's lost. And, as a podcaster and a writer yourself, and myself too, you understand your audience bias, right? You give something to your audience, and maybe it's a hot take, and they go, "Oh, this is so good," and you feel encouraged, you feel obligated to provide more of that. So you have a lot of people that they go, "Okay, well, part of it is if you're an 18 or 19-year-old kid, you're on TikTok all day, you're staring at a 4-year degree that's basically worthless," and we could talk I'm sure, at length about that. So you decide, okay, well, I'm going to start streaming, and I'm going to start doing video game streaming, or I'm going to create a YouTube channel. And even if it has a, fairly benevolent impulse kind of behind it, it's very easy a lot of times to become convinced that you're hot shit, or if you're a covert narcissist and maybe you're overweight or you're mentally ill or you have, these problems, it's a lot easier to get validation from people by posting about it than it is to recognize that it's actually in your self-control. You can go to the gym, you can eat less. These are things that you should be encouraged to do, and you should have someone say to you, yeah, if you want to live a healthy, happy life, which I want for everybody, you have to take responsibility. So I think most of it, to kind of summarize, most of it comes down to the way we use our technology. And we just constantly get reinforced that, oh, it's totally normal to film, selfie style videos while your kid is in the background about how, her ex is a jerk or something like that. Something that if you were doing in person, it'd be very off-putting and strange. But we just don't have that anymore. We don't have that barrier.
Do you think main character syndrome is something that one sex is prone to over the other, or is it kind of equal across the board?
I think it manifests in different ways. I think women, just looking at the, data, there's like, if you look at like cluster B disorders, right, which is, I believe, antisocial personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and what's the final one? Borderline personality disorder. Men are far more represented in antisocial personality disorder than women. It's like 90-1 or 9-1,
Okay.
And same thing, with the histrionic and borderline, it's overrepresented in women. So you do have, and I do think too, we're in a mental health crisis.
Yes.
I'm not sure necessarily, I think there's many factors that have caused it. But those people, you don't have to pass a mental health screening to start posting online or anything like that, right? So, in men, you get a lot of this. And you see it reinforced, like, what I do in marketing and business. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. I see a lot of young guys who stumble into some sort of online business model and find a lot of immediate success. whether that's selling on Amazon or they're drop shipping or they're doing something else, right? And good for them. They take that and they use that to create a sort of Andrew Tate style brand, where it's like, okay, well, you guys are normies. You don't know how to do what I do. Here's a picture of me with the rented car. Like I say in the piece too, it's a lot of revenue screenshot posting and not a lot of profit screenshot posting. So they're building this facade that's antagonistic towards other people, but it's not. It's not how any really successful person I've ever met who's older acts or behaves. And then you see kind of the opposite with a lot of women too, who are mentally unstable in different ways than a lot of these young guys or guys in general. And they are pushed to basically not take any responsibility for their life in various ways. Everything is the fault of capitalism, or it's the fault of God, religion, or men, right? And in a sane world, it's like you would see this and see it for what it is, but we have a really hard time doing that. A lot of the borderline typical behavior is, if you've ever been in a relationship with someone like this, you'd recognize it, which is, one day, oh, I love you, I'll do anything for you, I'm so sorry, you're perfect, I need you. And then the next day it's completely flipped. So, and these types of disorders are also on the rise as well. So I do think there's a difference. Obviously, there's a little bit of overlap too, but there is a difference. And you also see a lot of difference with, for example, if you're an extremely attractive woman, how and you don't necessarily have some sort of grounding, moral foundation. I mean, I follow a lot of gym people on Instagram. If I was to open up my, just guys lifting, things like that, I go to the gym, but it feeds me content of just girls in bikinis all the time. It's like softcore porn all the time now, which I don't like, and so you do see some variations too, based on how someone is naturally kind of in the hierarchy. You're not going to see too many really, really attractive young women talking, sharing messaging that is, more aligned with like a covert narcissist and vice versa. So it's all very interesting. It's like a giant social experiment, really.
Once a month, my supporters of this show and myself and a special guest have a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded. It's not posted. It's just private. It's between you guys, the guest, and myself. I do this because it means a lot for you guys who support me by showing me that this show means a lot to you. I love talking with you. I look at it as like a benefit for people that support the show, but it's really a benefit for me. I get to know you guys and have an off-the-record discussion with our guest. And, sometimes topics you don't want to necessarily have all the ins and outs discussed online, if you know what I mean. So to be in this group, please go to patreon.com/counterflow and donate $5 or more per month. And it gets you in this club. We do it once a month. It's a great time. It's great people. They're all smarter than me. So that's an upgrade from what you're used to. I can tell you that. The guests are always guests that people want to hear from. A lot of you guys will be familiar with many of the guests. Father Turbo's done it. Father Deacon Ananias has done it. David Patrick Carey's done it. My own priest, Father Ignatius, has done it. Father Moses McPherson's done it. It's a very good time, and I think you guys would enjoy it. If you love this content, please go to patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Thank you. Is there something, I just want to make sure I'm correct on this. A wise friend of mine told me that there are certain people that can't, let's say, how did he say this? That can only view every situation through their lens and no one else's. Like you can't, everything you look at, it's only the way I see it, and I can't imagine how they see me or how other people see the situation. Is that basically main character syndrome in your mind?
Yeah, essentially. Essentially. Yeah. I mean, that's probably the mental, the mental framework of it, and then it's expressed externally in different ways. But yeah, more or less.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see that a lot. I've also noticed it feels to me that if you were to point this out to the person who's doing it, it wouldn't go over well.
No, no, it never does. And there's a reason. I mean, I think there's a lot of issues with modern psychology. I mean, like the replication crisis, we can't even necessarily replicate these studies or anything again and again, but like personality disorders, and I do think it does come down to this a lot. It's the wiring of the brain is different, right? Like it just is. Like maybe in the case of some people, and I've seen this happen in my own life with people, but the grandiose narcissist can be humbled, what I say, mugged by reality. But it takes time. And, a lot of people, again, especially when you're at the top of some hierarchy, maybe that's financial, or, you're the high school quarterback, you get used to having girls doting on you in high school. It can take a lot of time, and sometimes it never changes, right? It could take a lot of time to be shown kind of the truth of reality. It's not guaranteed. And like I said, a lot of times, because of the technology that we have, there's almost, that kind of failure to realize just gets progressively pushed out and out and out.
Yes, because if there's an element to it where you mentioned earlier how people with similar traits are the ones sending the likes and the comments, and it feeds a delusional worldview, if you will. Right. And so it's like, you had a line in there or something great, like they're not looking for approval. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's, I see it. I'll see a post. And I'm like, what's this person thinking? This is mentally unhealthy, to say the least. And the comments under it, oh, you go, girl. Oh, yeah, same here, girl. It's the whole thing. I'm like, right. This is mean. What they're doing is mean because you're not helping the person. It's not love. You're feeding a delusional ego.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's it's really interesting just to open up your phone and see so many examples of it every single day.
Yes.
Something that there's a real difference between being vulnerable and authentic and having, expressing your opinion in a dignified way, and essentially debasing yourself for likes or comments.
Yes.
And it's I don't know what will change it. I mean, really, I think a lot of it comes down to just a lack of a moral grounding. I know I've said this. I'm repeating myself now, but I do think that needs to be emphasized because, my parents weren't perfect, and I'm 33. I'm an older millennial, but at the same time, it's like I did grow up with this sense of understanding what being an honorable person looks like, and having self-respect, and ways to, temptations to express yourself or be someone that you're not. And I really think that's something that's instilled in childhood. And I'm not sure, part of it too is a generation of really soft parenting. I think maybe that's starting to shift a little bit, but I see it a lot every day, just in the grocery store, just kids, 10, 11 years old, pulling stuff off the shelves, being loud. I mean, look, I get it. Kids, kids are kids, but, in giving them an iPad instead of correcting them, and when I was a bartender, I saw that a lot. Parents giving kids iPads instead of, okay, we're getting up out of the table, we're going to go outside till you calm down. So I do think it starts young.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that screen time is not healthy, in my humble opinion. There's something else that I really appreciate. Your line, aesthetics is downstream from the spiritual mission of training. Can you talk about that, the spiritual mission of training?
Yeah. Not to get too esoteric. I mean, I suppose we can. But,
oh, we can.
All right, beautiful. Beauty, aesthetic beauty, architecture, poetry, film. I mean, all of these things have a moral foundation to them, right? Like, as Christians, we understand, and when we go to liturgy or we walk into a church, there's it's beauty expressed as beauty, the divine is expressed in the beauty of the church, right? And this is why, again, people used to care about what our environment looked like. And we used to understand that when you go to church, or when you go to the market, or when you're just living in your town, in the home that you live in, it creates a sense of normalcy, and it inspires you to be something more.
Mm-hmm.
And because we can't just go down to this, buy up the strip mall property and strip it and turn it into some, temple of commerce or something. You have to look at what you can do at the personal level to bring beauty into your life. And I do think that starts with your physical body. It is a resume for your values and how you live. And for me, training is part of the spiritual mission of aesthetics, because one, I'm honoring what God has given me, right? Like, I want to live longer so I can continue to worship God and continue to have kids and continue to live a good life, because I think that's part of my divine duty. But it shows people that, beauty is something that it takes time, it takes effort to create it. It doesn't happen overnight, but there is, and it's hard to describe. It's like there is a feeling like when you walk into a church, or like when you walk into a beautiful old building, like your mind and your soul feels nourished, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just as when you finish your workout, or you finish a really hard set, or you hit a PR on your squat, you get that same sense of, it's slightly different, but you get that same sense of satisfaction, like you're putting in the work to create something beautiful. And that small thing, that small input, it does change the world, right? If everyone trained, if everyone lived a healthier life, I do think that people would recognize
mm-hmm.
The spiritual importance of beauty in everything.
Yes.
So that's really what it comes down to for me. It's, I do it for my health, and I do it, in the sense of vanity. I do want to look better, but 80% of it is recognizing that I can't talk about the world that I want if I'm not doing the bare minimum to, make myself a healthier, more beautiful person in the eyes of God too.
Mm-hmm. And we can segue into some spirituality stuff
Sure.
here. Before we jump into the I'm spiritual, not religious stuff, what is your background in with Christianity and atheism and all the things?
Sure. So I was raised in, an evangelical Protestant church
Mm-hmm.
Until about 14, 15 years old. And I guess you could say I've always been kind of a skeptic, just naturally, show me the data. That's always been kind of like my thing, for better or worse. And, growing up, I was baptized in a Baptist church, and I would call the type of religious upbringing I had as like rock star Christianity.
Yes.
So you've got
familiar.
the fog machines, you've got the worship band. And it kind of, as I was going through puberty and becoming a young man, 13 or 14 years old, I really started to see, you kind of come out of that phase where it's like, oh, this is just me. This is just my life. Yeah, we go to church,
Mm-hmm.
start questioning things. And
Mm-hmm.
at this particular point, like my mom and dad, who were both very religious, were going through a lot of marital troubles. So I came home, I didn't see the church or their faith reflected in our home environment.
Mm.
And then our pastor, who had, a real cult of personality, was having multiple affairs. And it was these types of things that made me go, oh, this is just a money laundering operation. Like, I don't want to be a part of this. And it was kind of at that same point too, where, Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. And at the time I thought, oh, these guys are, the real rock stars. These guys are cool.
Me too. I did the same thing.
They're saying what they're not allowed to say.
Yes.
And at the time too, it was during the early 2000s, conservatism in the United States was different. There was a lot of emphasis on, in Sunday school, they told me I couldn't listen to Metallica.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, but I love Metallica, I was a musician, still am. And so, over time, it just became something that wasn't cool to me. I didn't believe in it. I questioned it. And then for probably 8 or 9 years, I wouldn't say a militant atheist, but I did think religion was kind of a scam.
Yeah.
That changed. Really, it changed during COVID, to be completely honest. And I kind of had all this time on my,
Yes.
and I go, you know what? I feel really strongly about the faiths of other people and my own upbringing, but I haven't even sat down and read the Bible through, or I haven't even really looked into the historicity of Jesus or learned about any of the apostles or any of the saints. And as a history guy, I felt like I was, basically just coming from a place of arrogance that was and ignorance. So I kind of got the wheels turning. And, it kind of culminated when my wife and I got married and she got pregnant. We had our daughter. And by that point, I'd really been thinking, what type of world do I want my kids to grow up in? And in a few years prior, I had kind of started identifying as, I'm a spiritual person. Okay, well, I'm thinking, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a spiritual person, right? Does it mean that you have a prayer practice? Does it mean that you think all the prophets are equal? I started to really see some contradictions in just saying that. And I felt like it was cool. It was easy to just say, I'm a spiritual person.
Yes.
Because you essentially leave all doors open, but you don't make it into anything.
Yep.
Over time, last year, middle of last year, we started actively going to church. We went to Catholic church. Just started to really investigate my faith and feel where was I being called? So we went to Mass. We started going to the Eastern Orthodox parish in our town. And really over time, Eastern Orthodoxy makes a lot of sense to me because it's unchanged.
Yes.
It's the unchanged tradition. It's the structure of Christianity as it was intended thousands of years ago. And that's something that I was really looking for. I didn't want the cult of personality of the Protestant pastor. I wanted to talk to my church father, and we've had a lot of great conversations, and know that he's not infallible, but he's just more educated and understands the scripture. And he's essentially, he's a spiritual father. He's a guy, right?
Yes.
So, long story short, we've been going to this Eastern Orthodox church for a little over 2.5 months now.
Oh, how awesome.
It feels like home. It's like my faith is now, it's a very, very, very important part of my day-to-day life. So this coming year, goal is to become a catechumen and
excellent.
Yeah, and join the Orthodox Church.
Yes. Well, you already have, in my humble opinion, the correct disposition for it. I spoke with one of the elders on Mount Athos this past summer, and he's considered, as far as I can understand, the one with the most wisdom. Like, people will line up for hours to I just talk to him briefly. Sure. And I said, how do you approach evangelizing someone who's, let's say, Protestant, Southern Baptist, whatever, the kind of stuff that I see in Texas a lot?
Sure.
And he said, you don't, unless they have the correct disposition. Otherwise, you're spitting into the wind or something like that. So he didn't use that phrase, by the way. But yeah, his point was, unless someone has a correct disposition, then you're wasting your time. So I'm very excited for you and your family, because again, it does seem, even by your writing, I can tell that you have a correct disposition on this sort of thing. Let's get into the spiritual, not religious. What made you want to write about this? Was it your own experience of saying that, or do you see it everywhere? Were you just saying, enough of this, I got to write something?
Well, it was a little bit of both, and it was a collaboration with another creator. He's a Catholic, and I've had him on my podcast before. His name's Juan. He runs a blog called Simple Men. He would be a great guest, by the way. Not to impose, but
excellent.
He's a wonderful guy. So we had talked about this in the DMs, and he'd had a similar experience as well. And where I live in California it's like the Burning Man capital of the world.
Oh, okay.
It's a small town. It's full of all of these, people who actually I think are pretty cool for the most part, right? Like granola RFK voters.
Okay.
I
can get down with the RFK voters way over more than the Kamala voter. There's a different type.
Yes. Yeah. White dudes with dreadlocks and these sacred geometry stuff. So, I see it all the time. One, just it is something I felt like I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm talking to my wife about it all the time. And then really it kind of came down to this as I was, by this point, I consider myself a Christian without a church, so I believe that Jesus was our savior. He died and rose to heaven for our sins, all of these things. And part of that was looking into scripture years ago and having this realization going, okay, wow. So here are 24 sources saying that all of this happened. If this happened, which it did, this is the most important thing that's ever happened.
Yes. Yeah.
To take that, to dismiss it when you actually look into it and say, oh, well, it's a fable, it's a story, it's a metaphor, is wrong. And when it comes to like the spirituality, really what I see is people who want to identify as some sort of deep thinker, right? Which I understand, I resonate with that to an extent, but there's no boundaries, right? There's no boundaries. And so like when I was a spiritual person, it was, my worldview didn't have any grounding to it. I didn't know it's impossible to stand for anything when you don't know what you're standing against, or you don't know how to conceptualize what you're standing against.
Yes.
And I think spiritual worldview is just, it's an easy way to cope with that, because most people don't want to think about the reality of evil.
Right.
Most people don't want to think about the reality of goodness and beauty in God, and so they content themselves with, lighting incense and doing tarot cards and collecting gemstones. Mm-hmm. And, maybe they pick and choose some from here, some from there. And I realized too that, it was just, it was basically just a way to make excuses. I was also at the time, doing some research into Seraphim Rose.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
From up near you, up in that area.
Yeah, exactly. And, he was someone that he put a lot of stuff into words that, around sort of this desire for like a universal faith, right? Like the ecumenical movement in the 60s and 70s. And essentially was saying, look, if you're willing to say that, oh, well, Muhammad's also a prophet of God, or Buddha was a prophet of God, or whatever, then what do you actually believe? And just talking with spiritual people too, like, okay, you call yourself a pagan. Well, here's what the pagans actually believed, right? If you consider yourself a pagan, let's go back and let's look at some pagan practices, right? So, pagans believed, okay, when was the last time you performed an animal sacrifice, right? At a full moon. Okay, well, then you're not an actual pagan. You just like the aesthetic. You like the idea of being this way, or you like the idea of Wiccanism or Buddhism or whatever it might be. And all of those things, when you investigate them enough, they lead to either you have to buy in fully to this, or you have to realize that, you're not enough of an authority to pick and choose all these different things and say, okay, this is what I believe, because it contradicts everything.
Yes. Did you read God's Revelation of the Human Heart by Father Seraphim?
No, I didn't. I read
Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future.
Orthodoxy and the Religion
of the Future. Yeah. Okay. And when did you discover him in 2020?
No, I discovered him probably 2022. So he crystallized a lot of that thinking for me.
Yes. for you and anyone listening who's not read it, I highly recommend God's Revelation to the Human Heart. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's a pamphlet. But it's someone recommended it to me, friend of the show, Cyprian from the Royal Path. And I was an atheist, then agnostic. I at least realized it's stupid to say, I know there is no God, because you don't know that. So, right. And then I started getting curious about Orthodoxy because I was hearing it from people that I considered very wise. And so I wanted to dig into that, why they saw things in a more accurate way and what it had to do with Orthodoxy. He tells me that book. And I grew up going to a Protestant evangelical megachurch, very Zionist. And then I was an atheist for decades, such as yourself. And I read that and I'm like, wait a second, this is not the Christianity I was taught. Yep. Where has this been? It's been here since the beginning of time. But it blew my mind. And once you see things, you can't unsee certain things. So you can't say, I want to be Orthodox, then you get into it. You can't, but that's the truth. So it's hard to not that I would want to, but once you see it, you can't go, well, I'm going to just experiment and walk over here. Sure. You're home. This is it. The spirituality word, there's an emptiness to it. Do you think so?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, it means something different for everyone,
Yes, but which gets us into that subjectivism stuff and postmodernism.
Right. Yeah. If a word means something different to everyone, then the word means literally nothing.
Yes.
Right? Words are the best we can do to talk about real experiences and real things in our world. If I were to go out on the street, ask 10 people, what does being spiritual mean? I'd get 10 different answers.
Yes.
Yeah.
They've turned it in. They did the same thing with racism or big. It's like, what does that mean now? Sure. And anti-Semite. I heard a rabbi tell Candace Owens, it just means you're against Zionism. It's like, well, I'm against Zionism, so is that?
I'm against ethno-nationalism. Yeah, I must hate all Jewish people.
Yes, it's so the moral subjectivity where you say there is no good necessarily, there is no bad necessarily. I have my reality, your truth, my truth. That whole thing, is that often when you're in your experience with the spiritual, not religious world, was that sort of ubiquitous, let's say?
100%. Well, and the thing is, extrapolate that, take it out of it's easy to say that in the drum circle, right? Or when you're all at Burning Man tripping on acid. I never did that. I have no desire to go to Burning Man. But, it's easy when you're on some psychedelic or something to recognize, oh, you have your truth, I have my truth, but we're all one. Okay, well, extrapolate that out to the national scale or the continental scale. Okay, we all have our own truths, right? My truth might be, sure, yeah, abortion's fine in the final week of pregnancy. Okay, well, my truth is that it's fine all the time. My truth is that it's not fine all the time. You can't govern people when everyone has their own truth. It becomes apocalyptic, or it just becomes, might is right in that sense. Whoever can impose their truth on everyone else, that's what wins out at the end of the day. And on some level too, that's the world. It is thinking enough about what you actually believe, what's right and what's wrong, and that should be imposed to an extent on people.
Yes,
yes. We're kind of living in a world right now in the United States and various other places where people are so scared to stand for something.
Yes.
Look at all the harm that causes. I mean, I was just reading today, about what's going on in the UK with these, these thousands of girls, who have been, I don't even want to say it, trafficked and abused.
Yes.
I mean, so what's a nation that has a fundamental moral grounding in right and wrong understands that that's unacceptable in any and all cases. A nation that has my truth and your truth and, the subjective reality that's basically aimed at just empathizing with the way that everyone else lives.
Yes. Yes.
That enables it.
Yes. Yes. And it's not love. There's this weird they've bastardized the word love is love. And it's like, no, it's not. You're not the version that you're saying, meaning, oh, everyone's free to do whatever they want, no matter how harmful it might be to the culture, to society. That's not love. It's actually quite the inverse of it.
Right. Well, that's something too with, when I was inquiring, still am inquiring in a large extent to Orthodoxy, talking with our father, reading books, the Callisto Swear book.
Yes.
I think it's just Orthodox Church. Talking about the, this idea that like, okay, God loves you like you love your kid. If I see my daughter walking up to a fireplace and she's about to put her hand on it, I go and get her and we train her and say, no, even if it's off, you don't touch that, right? You protect your kids. You look out for them. You don't let them do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was a bad example. Maybe, when she's 9 or 10 years old, or, God forbid, when she's a teenager, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, hey, I love you. That's why you can't do this. Or that's why we need to have a conversation about this behavior.
Yes.
Because it might feel good. It might seem like the right thing to do in the moment, but you repeat that over time. What's it going to do to your soul? What's it going to do to you as a human being? And it's the same idea, So I completely agree. You can't allow for everything. You have to be willing to have hard conversations. And, it's not easy talking about where to draw the line, but it has to, you have to do it. And again, I think a lot of our problems come down to the fact that, like we've been talking about, everyone has their own philosophy. They stand for something, but they do it weakly. They can't discuss it. They can't tell you why.
Right.
Oh, well, I think this is true because I was told this is true. Or I put the black square on my Instagram, during the Black Lives Matter stuff because everyone else was doing it. But I haven't really looked into it. I don't really know where I stand, a lot of that. A majority of us are like that now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, unfortunately. When you were going through that spiritual, not religious phase, were you actively searching for something?
Yes.
What did you find? Not to mean how did you ended up Orthodox now or going to an Orthodox church? I mean, what did you find in the moment as you were searching?
I found a lot of personal discomfort, to be honest. It's, we all go through these stages, I think as men too, it's important. We feel, especially when we're young, like I've always been like I said, the debate kid. Oh, show me the data. Like I like talking about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I had such strong beliefs that when I started to peel back the layers and started to go, okay, well, here's why this thing that you thought was true is not. Or here's evidence to the contrary of what you felt so strongly about Jesus or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You basically have an ego death. And that was, the way out is through.
Yes.
You can't skip that step. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I really found was I found a lot of clarity at the end of the tunnel, but there was a lot of darkness getting through it. Just realizing how foolish I'd been to, and how basically how misguided I was in terms of like my philosophy on life, right? How many things contradicted themselves, or, I used to believe in karma. I was something that like, and in a way, right? Like there's Christian teachings too that obviously don't, they're not the same as the karmic teachings in the East, but obviously, treat people the way you want to be treated, the golden rule, things like that. Well, I started thinking like, okay, well, what is like the, if you believe this, what's the end result of that, right? What, like, is someone's, at what point is it just karma or is it, something else, right? So I just had these conflicting voices in the back of my head that I really had to wrestle with. And eventually it led me to where I am now. But, it was a period of spiritual darkness, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that main character syndrome and this strain of narcissism we're talking about also helps fuel the spiritual but not religious group?
Yes, 100%.
And how so?
Well,
So it's I am my own God, essentially, but I'll let you take this.
Yeah, it really is. I am my own God. And it's there's a lot of clout to be gained from identifying as something, right? And these things change like leaves in the wind, right? If there was another 5 or 6 like Gen Z TikToker influencers who, I just use that as an example, who started being super anti-religion all of a sudden, and they, it was like a big part of their platform. You'd see a lot of kids just swear it all off, or, people wear crosses for the aesthetic, but, they don't actually believe it, right? So yeah, I mean, it's to me, you see that a lot in these types of people. Again, because a spiritual belief system really doesn't draw any lines anywhere. If you believe in something, if you believe that this is good and this is bad and that you shouldn't do the bad thing, well, then you have no excuses to do the bad thing at that point. I mean, you and I are both sinners. We confess our sins. We understand that, but it's, you understand and I understand, like if I'm going to go to the bar tonight and leave my wife and kid to eat dinner alone and I can drink, it's like I'm committing a sin. That's not a good thing, and for people who have main character syndrome, it's, again, there's nothing to inhibit this behavior. There's nothing, it goes beyond even the just basic upbringing to, okay, well, like, what is the vision of you, the person, in all of humanity? If everyone lived like you, how would the world turn out?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question to ask.
There's just no mediating force there.
Right. Yeah. Well put. There's a lack of humility, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, let's say this. It takes humility when you come to the church, because from my own personal experience, there is a lot of, excuse my language, bullshit involved in who I am or who I was, and that you need to burn away, as it were, forging the sword, so to speak. And I assume that's some of the things that you noticed as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You have to have humility. And it's an ongoing practice, right? You don't reach the end of it and go, okay,
yeah,
I've done my penance. Now I'm a good person.
Yeah, because then that shows your lack of humility. And it's like, all right, I'm here. I am really humble and I'm great. It's like, wait, what?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we are a slave to our desires.
Yes.
And we're a slave to the desires of others. And, most people remain that way, right? Like, I'm not trying to put myself on a high horse and say that I'm any better. I'm not, right? Like, I've been trying to quit these things for the last year plus, but it's very difficult. I get brain fog like a madman. But yeah, I mean, for someone who's either a grandiose or a covert narcissist, it basically requires you to break out of it. It requires you to come to terms with the fact that you've been living a lie. You've been living a lie with yourself and for the sake of others. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do. Much easier to just make excuses, subconsciously. It's not even like people are going, oh, I'm making an excuse for this, but it's subconscious at this level. It's such a part of who you are. And God willing, those people come to terms with that. But yeah, I don't know what it will take, to be honest.
Right. Are you optimistic or pessimistic, or how, in that regard?
I am an eternal optimist.
Okay.
In a way. One, because there's certainly a lot of things to be passed. There's certainly a lot of problems that we need to solve. Just in this country, in my community, the circles expand in terms of what we need to do. But I think that, I take like a historical perspective, I suppose, where, we've gone through a lot of the same issues. We just have our own flavor of them. And I try and look at things like, I look at friends of mine who are like me, were atheists for a long time. Now they're interested in going to church. I see a lot of young men making these moves, getting involved in their faith, building businesses, not making excuses, getting into the gym. And these things, I try to focus on these things, or else it just, my mind just gets too dark, So I take, whether or not it's rational, I do think of myself as an optimist. And as a Christian too, it's kind of impossible not to be in some regard, right? Because
correct.
This is not being steered by me. So.
Right. Yeah. To me, in Orthodoxy, there's a masculine, let's say, overarching spirit or feel. Of course, there's hierarchy, and it is the Father is at the top. And that spiritual, not religious thing, from afar, I've never been what I would call that necessarily, but from afar, it looked overly smotheringly feminine. Did you get that from that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and there's the toxic, we hear toxic masculinity a lot.
Yeah.
Don't hear about toxic femininity a lot, but
not enough, right?
Not enough, right? And what are the symptoms of that? Like, what does that look like? Permissiveness, the lack of ability or willingness to, solve problems. Essentially, it gets very Jungian or Freudian even, right?
Yes.
So you have like these natural phases that men and women all have to move through in life. For young men, you're the hero. You have a mission. You have something you have to go out and get. You have to prevail through that. Then you can take that back to wherever and this is metaphorical at this point, but you take it back to your family or your community, and then you have you are put into a place of authority to help guide those younger than you, to help guide the next generation of heroes, and eventually you become a wise man. And for women, it's you have the maiden phase, right, where again life is brimming with opportunity. You have the world is expanding around you, and the next phase is the mother. And a lot of I do talk a lot about the relationship dynamics to an extent, because I think it's so important. It's such a signal for where we're at right now. And a lot of women are trying to stay in the maiden stage forever. And that again, when you enter that archetypal stage of motherhood, whether that's typically obviously involves raising a family, right? But you really see the necessity of boundaries. You can't have a amorphous worldview at this point, because you have something, a little person who is depending on you, and you have to think in black and white at this stage, and you have to wrestle with the intentions of how you want to bring this person up. So yeah, I do. There's a reason that a lot of young women identify as spiritual, and it's a big part of it, I think, is a failure to enter the next archetypal stage, which is arrested development at that point. In young men too, you see a different sort of negative outcome when, you never leave the hero stage, or you never go out and get something that you're supposed to. You never go on your mission. And you live a hedonistic lifestyle, or, you're that guy who's 38 years old and he's still going to the bar 4 times a week. So, I think that when it comes to young women specifically with spirituality, again, men establish boundaries. That's really like what we do, right? Like that's the interplay between men and women in the household, in the community. It always has been. This is not a controversial thing to say, but what women do is, they nurture, they care, they bring empathy, they bring creativity. Like they're a life-giving force too, right? And so with men and women, that dynamic is beautiful. It's holy. But, again, I don't think we live in a patriarchy. I think we live in a gynocracy. I think we live in a female mind, the mindset of arrested development. I'm butchering this.
I got
young, you.
Yes.
Who, it's hard to set boundaries for these people. So that's why you get such glaring contradictions in their worldview. 1 second they're marching for gay rights, the next second they're wearing a hijab and supporting Palestine. And I'm no fan of Israel, right? But I just look at,
Yes.
I'm like, okay, this is a strange hill to die on, because this summer you were at a pride parade where, there was all this, Sodom and Gomorrah, and now you're here. These things, again, they conflict with each other. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but
no, it's good. That was good. Yeah. That was good. And that can take us out. Plug anything and everything you'd like.
Sure. So my Instagram is my primary, primarily where I publish. That in my Substack, I post, and I'll give the ads for these in a second. My Instagram is Right and Lift, all one word. My Substack is Right and Lift. My Twitter is Build and Write. It's more of I talk a lot more about my work and marketing there. Big plans for the coming year. I'm going to be launching a book club either, next couple of weeks. So I have a weekly call. Really, I want it to be a place where, building a coalition of other people who don't have to be a writer, you don't have to be a content creator, you don't have to be any of these things. People who are just interested in ideas. So, have a weekly call talking about ideas, talking about what you're reading. It's for my paid subscribers, $10 a month. And then just on my regular Substack, I usually post 2 articles a week, a little bit more for my paid subs. And it'd be an honor to welcome any new people into my audience. So thank you, Buck.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll include the links to all of those things in the show notes page for this episode. What, not to get too nerdy, what jurisdiction is the Orthodox Church you're going to?
It is in the Ukrainian Orthodox.
It's Ukrainian.
Church.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Yeah, it's not OCA. The Metropolitan that I believe he's located in. So I've been doing a little bit of digging on this myself because I'm curious, because I know there's kind of a rift between the Russian church and the Ukrainian church. Mm-hmm. But from what I have learned, this branch of the Ukrainian church is, helping foster a lot of ministries and parishes throughout the country, or not just America, but throughout the world. Okay. So, same liturgy, St. John Chrysostom's liturgy.
Yes.
All that stuff. But yeah.
Excellent. I'm so excited for you guys that you're doing that. Joe Gillespie, thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, Buck. Always a pleasure.
I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion with new friend of the show, Joe Gillespie. Go subscribe to that Substack over at Right and Lift. It's fantastic. I think this should have given you a good taste of what he's all about. And next week, we're diving into a topic that I will be hitting on throughout the course of 2025, because now that the culture has moved rightward, there's something we've got to squash. Let's put it that way. The myth of Judeo-Christianity. We're going to do that starting next week and throughout 2025. Until then, Happy New Year to you all, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow Podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.